Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Wall Street Goose channel, where you will learn about finance and the stock market. Learning when to buy and sell a stock will make all the difference in becoming profitable or losing your capital. Enjoy the program.
Supposed to be a fund of $100 billion?
Yes.
Now that would be the biggest fund ever raised. So when you told people you were going to raise a $100 billion fund, did they tell you you were a little crazy?
Well, some people said.
MASA's son was once the richest man in the world for 3 whole days. And then he lost about $70 billion almost overnight, the biggest personal loss in history. He once managed to secure $45 billion worth of funding after a 45-minute meeting.
$1 billion per minute.
He's also responsible for the single greatest investment ever made. But on the other hand, many feel he's simply a crazy gambler who treats the economy like a casino, and that he's causing catastrophic damage. This is a man who once threatened to set himself on fire if he didn't get a business deal. A man who's invested billions of dollars in entrepreneurs purely based on the sparkle in their eyes. And yet, I love him. You see, I've recently been making videos telling the stories of totally different businesses, like Uber, Yahoo, TikTok, and yet MASA's son always seems to be connected. I feel like I'm in that movie where Jim Carrey starts seeing the number 23 everywhere. But for me, all roads lead to MASA's son. The majority of the world know extremely little about this man, but they should. He is quite literally changing the world and betting on our future. And his story is one of the most fascinating I've ever heard. It's inspiring, it's terrifying, and most of all, it's absolutely insane.
Is he the world's most astute tech investor, or is he the luckiest guy on the planet?
MASA's son's grandparents emigrated to Japan from South Korea by hiding on a small fishing boat. They had no food, nowhere to stay, and couldn't speak the language. MASA's start in life was similarly bleak. He was considered an outsider in Japanese society because of his heritage, and his childhood classmates threw rocks at him. His father barely made enough to get by, and did any odd jobs he could to make money, from raising pigs to selling illegal liquor. From an early age, MASA was adamant he wanted to build a better life for himself. The bullying he received as a kid only made him more determined. And by middle school, MASA decided on his life plan. He wanted to become Japan's most successful businessman. He idolized a man named Den Fujita, who had brought McDonald's to Japan. MASA spent hours as a teenager calling Den's office asking to speak to him, but the receptionist always told him he was too busy.
They don't give me the right answer, so I said, okay, this is a waste of my telephone bill. So I flew into Tokyo, and I said, I came because the phone call becoming more expensive than air ticket.
Den was impressed with this kid's conviction, and that he'd flown to his office to see him. He agreed to a 15-minute meeting with MASA, who asked him for advice.
Yeah, I asked him, what business should I do? Computer, that's the one.
Den's other recommendation was simple. MASA should go to America. MASA immediately took this advice to heart, and at the age of just 16, he went to California to pursue his business dreams. He brushed up on his English, then went to an American high school. However, just a few days in, he realized this was taking too long, and convinced the school to let him take the college entrance exam early. Now, whilst MASA was very bright, he wasn't really ready for the exam, but somehow he just managed to scrape through. So less than a month after enrolling as an American high school student, MASA graduated, and went to study economics and computer science at the University of California. Of course, he also needed money, and he asked his friends if there were any jobs where he could make $10,000 a month but only work 5 minutes a day. His friends obviously thought he'd lost the plot.
So I said, okay, what is the best, most efficient use of my time? It's invention. So I set alarm clock 5 minutes. Come, invention, come, right?
MASA spent 5 minutes every day coming up with new invention ideas, so he could patent them and sell them on. Of course, not all the ideas were great, but there were some gems in there, because MASA realized there were 3 approaches to coming up with ideas. The first was to search the solutions to problems he had in his life. For example, here was a company that distributed computer software, and thus he created a new company called SoftBank. Now, at this point in the early 80s, personal computing was still in the very early phases. But MASA was extremely optimistic about the industry, especially after his old mentor had told him to focus on computers. MASA believed SoftBank could become the top distribution company in Japan, despite the fact he had absolutely no experience with software. He hired 2 employees to help him, and one morning he stood on a crate in the office and told them that SoftBank was going to become a billion-dollar company. But both employees soon began to think he was crazy, and they quit soon after. And at first, it looked like those employees might have been right. SoftBank struggled to take off. MASA tried to start some magazines to generate interest in computing, but they didn't take off well either. Pretty much everyone was telling him to stop, as he was going to blow all the money that he'd earned. But MASA ignored them and kept plowing more and more money into the business. And eventually, his persistence paid off. SoftBank then rode the wave of demand in personal computing in the early 90s. And then, disaster struck. Son began to feel increasingly ill and was diagnosed with chronic hepatitis and became bedridden in hospital. MASA was a workaholic and nervously asked how long the treatment would take. The doctor told him there was no guarantee they'd even be able to cure him at all. MASA had finally got his company up and running successfully, and now he was facing the fact he might not have long left to live. He had a daughter who was only a year old, and his wife was pregnant with another child. To complicate things further, MASA had taken out loans from the bank to help fund the company, and he knew they'd pull his funding if they found out about his illness. So MASA had to keep up the facade that everything was fine, and would sneak out of the hospital to turn up for company meetings. Thankfully, MASA recovered. But his health scare convinced him that he needed to act even bigger, faster, and crazier, since he couldn't take any time for granted. By the middle of the 90s, SoftBank had 800 employees and $1 billion in revenue, and MASA took the company public to raise even more money. Software distribution had been very successful, but it wasn't enough for MASA. He had such a clear vision of how technology was going to change the world. And so he started making investments in other tech companies and became known for making audacious business bets. For example, he threw millions of dollars into a new company called Yahoo at a valuation of $40 million. When the company had its IPO a few months later, it became valued at $808 million, meaning SoftBank had made a gigantic return in just a few months. MASA was building a war chest, but he never sat on that money. He'd always reinvest it right away into something new. By the end of the 90s, SoftBank was a giant conglomeration that was basically acting like a venture capital fund. SoftBank's main business was no longer selling anything, it was buying other tech businesses that MASA believed in. For example, in 1998, he poured $400 million into E-Trade after a single call with its founder. However, if you want to start investing in businesses yourself, then you'll want to know about our awesome video sponsor, Moomoo, a stock trading platform that's offering some incredible bonuses for new users. Right now, if you use the link in the description, you can get up to 5 free stocks worth up to $3,500 each. I repeat, free stocks. You have nothing to lose here, so it's a no-brainer to sign up. What I love about Moomoo is that not only is it a great platform to buy and sell stocks with 0 commission fees, they also provide you with research tools so you can make more informed decisions about what to actually invest in. And in case you're wondering, yes, you can trade shares of SoftBank. So no matter whether you're just starting out with investing or you're an experienced investor looking for a great all-in-one platform, Moomoo is the perfect choice. I have genuinely not seen any platform offer such great bonuses, so make sure you use the link in the description now so you can get those free shares yourself when you deposit any amount. After you've done that, MASA raised the largest Japanese investment fund ever, which he began throwing into hundreds of internet companies, since he believed the internet was the next big phase of technology that would transform the world. The New York Times started calling MASA the Bill Gates of Japan. In fact, for 3 days in the middle of 2000, MASA passed Bill Gates as the richest man in the world. But then the dot-com bubble burst, the market crashed, and MASA lost $70 billion, more wealth than any single investor has ever lost in history. If you thought that was going to slow MASA down, think again. MASA spent the next decade taking yet more risks and betting big. In fact, he's sometimes been described as a Wall Street bets trader, but who actually has a lot of money to spend. In 2001, MASA managed to get into the Japanese broadband business after barging into the telecoms office of the Japanese government, shouting, "This is the end. If you don't help me, I'm gonna pour gasoline all over myself and set myself on fire." MASA then launched a broadband service in Japan at half the price of competitors, and even though this lost hundreds of millions of dollars, MASA believed in the future they'd be able to make a profit by offering add-on services, although he was very vague about when the business would actually be profitable. He reportedly had saleswomen in striped miniskirts handing out free modems on Tokyo street corners. Like with many of MASA's projects, the focus was simply rapid growth and gaining market share. Profits would come later, hopefully. Many people were skeptical, of course, but clearly MASA's blind belief in the internet was absolutely correct. However, by 2007, MASA had already identified what he believed would be the next big wave of the internet, the shift to mobiles instead of PCs. So, MASA had a call with another hero of his, Steve Jobs. MASA told Steve about an idea of his for a mobile phone that was more like a mini computer. But Steve told him Apple was already working on something like this, called the iPhone. MASA was excited and asked if he could get exclusive rights to sell it in Japan. Steve Jobs laughed and reportedly said, "MASA, you've got to be mad. We've not even publicly announced we're developing the iPhone yet. And you don't even own a mobile phone carrier in Japan, so how are you going to sell it?" But MASA simply said he'd buy a phone company. And sure enough, MASA soon took out yet more debt to buy Vodafone Japan for around $20 billion.
MASA, you are crazy, we have not talked to anybody, but you came to see me as the first guy, I give to you.
So because of his persistence, MASA now had the rights to sell the iPhone in Japan. And this deal meant he was able to sell a huge amount of phone contracts, as everyone was excited to try out the new iPhone. And as always, MASA offered extremely low-cost deals in order to eat up market share. Meanwhile, MASA was still investing in a variety of other tech businesses, like a robotics company that creates robots with the ability to read human emotion. He frequently spoke about his 300-year vision and how in the future, SoftBank could be a telepathy company, or he even suggested maybe talking to dogs would be possible. But whilst MASA was buying companies at a pace most investors couldn't even dream of, he still wanted more. It wasn't enough for his ambition. In fact, he'd missed out on some deals he wanted because money had been tied up elsewhere. For example, he'd had a meeting with Jeff Bezos about investing in Amazon in the early days, but MASA hadn't been able to free up enough capital quickly enough, so he missed out on the deal. Desperate to not miss out on the next Amazon, MASA realized he needed a true war chest, so much money that he would never have a limitation again. And thus, he came up with an idea of the Vision Fund, a $100 billion venture capital fund, which was more than 4 times larger than any other fund in history.
So when you told people you were going to raise a $100 billion fund, did they tell you you were a little crazy?
Well, some people said.
Now, if you're thinking that raising $100 billion sounds a little tricky, normally you'd be right. But luckily for MASA, something interesting was happening in Saudi Arabia. The country was incredibly wealthy because of its oil, but as the world began to shift towards renewable energy, it became clear they needed to shift their economy away from being so reliant on oil. Enter Mohammed bin Salman, the next Saudi crown prince, eager to start investing his country's wealth into other areas. He wanted to funnel their oil money into big long-term investments for the future. And so, who better to turn to than MASA Son, whose entire reputation was for betting big on the future. They knew of MASA's track record and wanted his help to find the next big tech giants. So MASA flew out to meet the Saudi prince to see if he'd invest in his Vision Fund. On the flight over, MASA looked through the presentation his team had prepared and casually changed the amount they were asking for from 30 billion to 100 billion. We've got to aim high, MASA reminded his team.
In 1 hour, you convinced him to invest $45 billion.
No. 45 minutes, $45 billion. $1 billion per minute.
That's right. In 45 minutes, MASA secured an initial investment of $45 billion from Saudi Arabia, which would be put into the Vision Fund. SoftBank also put in some money of their own, along with money from Abu Dhabi, and even some money from companies like Apple and Foxconn. MASA had succeeded in his goal of raising a staggeringly huge fund of $100 billion.
So we are investing $100 billion just on one thing, AI.
You see, the purpose of the fund is simple. MASA believes society is approaching the singularity, the point where artificial intelligence transcends human intelligence. MASA had been right about the previous waves, personal computing and software, then the internet, then mobiles, and now he believes the next big change will be AI. As always, when MASA commits to something, he goes all in. High risk, high return has always been his mentality. MASA himself has said he hopes to be remembered as a crazy guy who bet on the future. And whatever you may think of him, I think it's hard to argue with that. However, this wouldn't be a Magnates Media video without pointing out this story has a darker side. Firstly, MASA has been accused of creating extreme bubbles and inflating prices. He's distorted the true value of many companies, such as putting billions of dollars into companies like WeWork and a dog walking app called Wag, under the guise they were tech companies when they really weren't. Many would argue that MASA's approach of investing billions of dollars based on 15-minute meetings and gut instinct is just reckless. For example, he put $4 billion into WeWork after a meeting that took less than half an hour. And he didn't even look at the pitch deck. And even on some of the companies MASA has invested in, they've been left frustrated too, as sometimes his giant investments are like a kiss of death. He tells his companies to think 10 times bigger than they were planning, to act crazier. But because he gives them far more money than they actually need, this often causes companies to start spending wildly and pursue a growth at all cost strategy.
If you go in the room and ask for $100 million and he says, well, I was going to give you 500 million, so why do you only need 100? If you don't have a good answer for the 500, you're not getting the money.
He's also been accused of using capital as a weapon, throwing endless cash at companies with the belief that the best funded startup can outspend all its competitors in winner-take-all markets.
You have so much money that anybody even thinking of competing with you just looks at the size of your checkbook and gets scared and doesn't even try.
But this means the companies he invests in don't actually focus on building a sustainable, profitable business. And some of those companies also complain that MASA would shower them with attention at first and then find a new toy and move on. There's even accusations that if companies try to turn down MASA's money, saying they don't need it, he'll threaten to invest in their rivals instead, in order to force companies to accept his investments. And in some cases, he invests in rivals anyway, like the fact he invested many billions into Didi, Uber, Grab, and other ride-sharing apps. And it's not just private companies where SoftBank has distorted the price. They were recently found to be the Nasdaq whale behind billions of dollars of call option trades on public tech companies. Basically, MASA has such huge amounts of money, he can literally move markets by plowing billions of dollars into call options. Now, hearing MASA's underdog story, coming from nothing, I found myself rooting for him, but it does seem that underneath that smiley exterior is a ruthless shark. Maybe it's because English isn't his native language, but the way he speaks is so simple and casual. He seems like a character rather than a man quite literally having drastic impact on multiple industries and economies. If someone like Bezos or Zuckerberg were saying the same things, maybe it would sound more sinister. Perhaps there's an argument that MASA's fun, bubbly personality somewhat masks the reality. But personally, I don't think MASA is doing this for just money or power. I believe he's genuinely passionate about technology and just extremely optimistic about the future, and he simply wants to accelerate the vision he has. And whilst it's true that a lot of his investments aren't profitable yet, MASA has always said he's playing the long game. Whilst it's entirely possible his fortune could get wiped out again from a series of bad bets, it's also entirely possible that he becomes the richest person in the world again, especially if his vision about AI comes true and he backs the companies at the forefront of the AI revolution. Because then he can create synergy between those companies where they work together. Either way, I think you have to give MASA some credit. After all, the literal definition of an entrepreneur involves taking on financial risk. And so, whilst I'm not suggesting we all bet everything we own on tech stocks, I think it's sometimes useful to ask ourselves, what would MASA Son do here? Just as a reminder to aim a little higher. Because another thing you have to respect is that from an early age, MASA created a 50-year life plan for himself. Start a company in his 20s, build wealth in his 30s, deploy that money in his 40s, tie up loose ends in his 50s, and hand things over to the next generation after he turns 60. And he's executed on that life plan extremely well so far. The real question now is if he's really going to step away from it all soon, like his life plan suggests. MASA seems to love the game, and no gambler ever wants to leave the casino. Truthfully, MASA has had that same gambling instinct since childhood. For example, when his father opened a coffee shop, MASA suggested he give out free drink vouchers, believing that his father would make the losses back later because he'd have attracted so many new customers. And MASA's ambitious, growth-minded philosophy still hasn't changed all these years later. It's just he now has an almost endless supply of money to execute on his ideas. For example, MASA's also investing in Neom, a futuristic city being built from scratch by using technology. There's talk the city will have flying cars, commercial space travel, robot butlers, and an artificial moon that rises each night. It will even host a genetic modification project to make people stronger. MASA has also talked about his time machine management theory, the theory that the US is like the future and every other country will go through the same technology transition. So if you know what's successful in the US, investing in other places is like going back in time in a time machine. There are undoubtedly some lessons to learn from MASA. But the truth is, MASA Son remains an enigma. Is he one of the most shrewd investors and businessmen ever, with a vision of the future many people just aren't yet appreciating? Or is he a lucky gambler, destroying venture capital and manipulating markets? The debate over whether MASA is crazy or a genius will continue. But I say, why can't he be both?
This is definitely an exciting life. I'm having fun.
Wow.
If you want to know the story behind some of MASA Son's investments, you can check out these mini business movies I made right here. Thanks for being a legend and watching to the end. I'll see you next time. Cheers.